slaves. You wrote the book.
Well, it certainly is an issue that we've never settled, and the only response we've been ever able to give about it has been one of anger and hostility. But there are some unresolved issues about it, and what this book does, Are You Still a Slave? It's a test workbook. It's 50 questions, true and false. There are no trick questions, and it's designed to let us find out if we are practicing slavery, self-induced now, since we no longer have a slave master, without, any outside intervention. If we are still doing the things that we did in slavery that impact upon our lifestyle today.
You said a couple of things, and you feel free to jump right in. The first thing you say is, we've never resolved it. When you say we, the black community, the black-white community, America, the world.
Well, that's part of it not being resolved. We keep expecting, something because we experienced that trauma, because our ancestors experienced that trauma. We want some sympathy. We want the 40 acres and a mule. We want some kind of therapy. We want something for it, and we've never even really gotten any recognition for it. It's unresolved between us because it represents so much pain that it makes us embarrassed, it makes us ashamed about it, and so we would rather fluff it over and repress it and say forget about it. But that history still lives in us, and while we can say that biological traits are transmitted through regular heredity, cultural ideas are also transmitted, and right now we are living with many of those slavery ideas that we have never resolved. And we don't need a slave master. It's like a self-induced post-hypnotic trance we're in. We're doing it on our own now.
When you say slavery ideas, and remember this is a conversation,
Sure.
everyone can jump in. When you say slavery ideas, what do you mean?
Well, I mean, a lot of the decisions that we make, a lot of the attitudes we have
Give me an example.
are very routine and moderate or acceptable, actually are rooted in slavery. Ideas we might have about, say, funerals. There's one. There's a question in the book about the purpose of funerals and why we attend them. And most of us would say, yes, we do attend them to pay homage to the dead and to support the families and so forth. But that isn't really how the funeral idea started. The funerals of laying the body out in the casket. When our people came over here on the ships, any slave who was just more rebellious than the others, they might be used as an example. And so they might beat that slave every day, 2 or 3 days, and make the other slaves, when they came up above deck for air and water, to watch them, to see this beating in order to strike terror in their hearts, to put fear in them. And then when that slave finally died, they would cut the head off of the slave, perhaps put it on a stick or a barrel, and then make all of the other slaves march past it and kiss that head.
What does that have to do with burial, though? Because the burial rites trace back all the way to Africa.
Well, I'm dealing with the funeral. Let me say funeral instead of burial.
Okay, but the funeral procession dates all the...
Not the funeral procession that we do here in America. That came from slavery, where we walk past the casket in single file. Even if the casket is closed, we march past it.
And you're
Many
saying
people
that
still kiss,
but you're saying if we walk past the casket in single file to look at a person who is dead, we're a slave?
Well, it came from a process that started on the ship. Yes, I am saying that. It came from being on the ship.
Well, part of the difficulty, I think, of talking about the consequences of slavery is that you have to have many levels. I think Ms. Ali is exactly right to talk about the consequences of slavery on our contemporary culture. I wouldn't want to necessarily trace them to a one-to-one correspondence. What we did in Africa or what we did not do in Africa, what we did in America as a result of enslavement, then being correspondingly related to practices we do now, because there's so many influences that are mongrelized, that are
that's what this book shows. Together. It shows the correlation. It shows that the things that we did then, the attitudes we had, and the things that traumatized us so much psychologically and emotionally, we are still doing those things. Now, let me tell you, the slave master understood the impact and the effect of trauma, which is why if they beat a man or burned him or hung him, they would make all of the other slaves come out and watch it. They would even put the little baby on the ground below the man hanging, because they knew if they could make a genetic impact of terror on the brain of that black person, that we would carry that into the future.
Right.
And so that's what this shows. So we have a lot of things that have not been settled.
What we have to do today is understand that we have gone from pyramid builders to project dwellers. And we have to look at our condition in America and ask ourselves, are we really all that we claim to be, and are we that which we should be? And if our actions would be approved by our enemy, if our actions would be sanctioned and condoned by our enemy, then we have to seriously question ourselves of whether we are really fulfilling our duty to the community, or are we acting as a slave. Most of our problems stem from the black Holocaust in slavery, the drugs, the homosexuality, the immorality. The problems that we have today were created here in America. God made the black man and the black woman, and the white man made niggas. So this is what we have to think about as we engage in this discussion.
Well, part of the thing is, you see, the problem I have with, if we use slave as a metaphor, if we're using it as which I think you're doing, you're talking about metaphorically, that is, we're slave if we're we are subject to a condition over which we claim to have no control. That is, we don't have any individual will or autonomy.
Well, you know,
I'm saying, let me finish. My point is this, though. My point is that when we talk, the problem I have with talking about the continuing effects of slavery is that what happens is that black folk end up talking about the indexes of slavery with one another, judging them based upon their own preferences. So that if I prefer to have an African name versus a so-called Christian name, or if I prefer to follow Christianity...
Yeah, that does make you a slave, because that's not your name.
Right.
You never found a Jew that named a child Adolf Hitler.
Right, no, that's
so why then are we naming our black children names after the white people that enslaved us?
But there are a variety of choices. Let me finish my point, though. My point is this, is that your personal preferences are indexed as a way of... Let me finish. As a way of saying somebody's a slave or not. So that we can have debates about whether if I'm a Christian or not.
This is 8 pages of bibliography starting at about 1560.
Right. But I still haven't made my point. Let me make my point. My point is this, is that when we get into notions, I think part of this is the quest for purity. There's no such thing as regressing back to a pure state of Africanity. There's no such thing.
No,
let me finish. So I think that part of what we're dealing with is that we are dealing with the intersection of different realities and identities of constituting what it means to be black. Paul Gilroy in his book, his recently published book, talks about the transatlantic experience. That is, we're neither West Indian altogether, we're neither North American altogether, we're neither British altogether or African American. We're all those things together.
Well, what this Are You Still a Slave addresses, Bear, and then you, brother, what this addresses is that we have never received any therapy or any debriefing. And I mentioned the Iranian hostages before. After 440 days, the trauma that they experienced in 1979, many of them are still in therapy. So I said, if they are still in therapy for something that happened 10 or 15 years ago, then what must we experience after being enslaved for 440 years as opposed to 440 days? And in therapy, what you mentioned, the first thing the therapist has to do is to take the patient back to the trauma and build from there. You can't fluff that over and act like it didn't happen. And then the therapist has to teach the patient to forgive themselves.
But I'm not saying that therapy is not...
We can't omit that. And we have to go back to that. Get that straight, get it settled, and then move forward.
Post-traumatic syndrome is an American term. It's not an African term. Right. Therapeutic intervention...
That's the experience we are having. We have to use the language we're speaking today, brother. What language you want to talk?
No. Let me jump in here at some point. By the same token, when you talk about that, we have names, we have American names. Well, the reality is, what are we going to call ourselves?
Well, that's what this book is about. You don't know that.
The reality. Hold on. The other reality. I read
Nobody get off the ship named Daryl. What's your name?
But you just
said I read your book. And in terms of reading your book, it's confusing for a lot of reasons. Some of the questions that you ask in the book, they're very subjective.
You must have failed the test. Oh my God!
No, I didn't fail your test. I don't worry about your test.
It's very subjective.
Right, it's subjective, and it's a matter, and it's based on your interpretation of what's being said there. So what are you saying here?
What the failure does?
You set this process up for people to answer these questions,
right?
And you say,
and then I give you the root of the idea.
And you say certain parts of the questions, 31 through what?
Don't give that away on the air, brother. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Let us talk about some of the
hardcore pure-blooded slave.
But in terms of setting that process up, what you do, that is subjective. That is your process for setting it up, and that doesn't mean that people have to buy into that.
I researched the information.
No, but what he's talking about, let me see if I can help out here. And then we'll let you in, and then we'll let you in, because this is good this morning. But we want to learn. The purpose is to learn. I think it's very important for us to talk about the impact of slavery, what it has done, and how we can get over it. And that's what we want to do. But when you raise a question like, you have a question in the book. You don't want me to talk about the questions.
You can talk a few questions.
Thank you for giving me the permission, because I didn't. Okay. You talk about if you tell a joke, if a white person tells a joke and the joke is not racist, and if you laugh, you're a slave. Well, what if it's funny? I mean, what if it's just a joke,
I think that's an old habit, as I said, of us being forced to laugh at the slave master's joke.
But you don't laugh at anything that's not funny.
Yes, we do. We laugh if we think it'll get us some points with a person.
I would not laugh if it wasn't funny.
But I think that's a wrong perception that you have in terms of that.
We do laugh at things like that.
Think about reading
we particularly, a lot of times when we see white people, we burst into a grin. They don't have to say nothing. Just look at us, and we start smiling all 52
Okay, before we get to behavior, maybe what we ought to do is define what is a slave mentality today. How we see it. Let's take a break.
Okay.
And when we come back, everyone will tell you. You can depend on that. What a slave mentality is right after this.
This was going so fast.
We're back, and this is a really interesting conversation with a lot of opinions about slaves. Are we still slaves? Do we have a slave mentality? And if so today, how does it manifest itself?
Okay, case in example. Malcolm X said slave mentality is this. When the master got sick, the house slave would say, "Master, we sick." When the house caught on fire, the house slave would die trying to put the fire out, but it was a field slave who would pray for a strong wind. Example, when we, the black revolutionary students of Howard University, when we stood up to make Howard University what it should be, a mecca of Afrocentric black revolutionary thought, many Negroes, those with dead slave mentalities, those who fear the white man, immediately began buck dancing.
But can I ask you a question? I'm going to stop you because I have to know.
And they were in fear of us bringing what we had the right to bring to the campus. Do you allow
debate? Because what you're suggesting is that if you go on Howard campus, university campus, and if you suggest a way that the university should be run, and anyone who doesn't agree with you is a nigger, a buck dancing nigger, you called it.
Well, anyone who would disagree with the right under the United States Constitution, First Amendment, to bring various points of view and thought to the campus, that would be a buck dancer.
But why?
Because indeed you should stand behind the Constitution that we all respect, and we should be able. University means uni and diversity. It's one campus, but a diverse points of view that should come in. But to try to stop
debate.
Oh, I welcome open debate
that's not totally
because
true.
I welcome open debate because I know that I have the truth.
I don't think they welcome open debate at all.
Why do you say that?
I think that when Dr. Muhammad was on campus, he blasted Jews, he blasted the gay community. Let me finish. He blasted the gay community, and for the say that y'all, I don't think that y'all are very diverse in terms of accepting various views and various viewpoints.
First of all,
and because of that, let me finish. And because of that, because you come from a Afrocentric perspective, I think that's fine. But I think you need to process that more than you have.
But
already.
I don't want to go into a discussion about the Nation of Islam. What I want to do is talk about our slave mentality and how we exhibit it. I was just curious about his statement.
Let's talk about the general slave profile of contemporary times so we can recognize them. They refer to other blacks as you guys instead of sister brother, wears brand name clothes so that the white people's designer name shows, wears a cross around the neck, on the lapel, or hanging on the wall in the home.
So
refuses to call other blacks by their African names.
If I choose to wear a cross today, you would call me a slave?
That's a mark of slavery.
You would call me a slave?
The symbol that was used to enslave us and continues to.
That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous.
Let me state this.
Let me talk
about Christianity.
Anybody that wear a dead white man around their neck bleeding has a problem with slavery.
If somebody
at the same time, you have to, excuse me, at the same time you have to consider that Bishop Stallings in this town, Washington, D.C., at some point said, and drawing a picture down, that African Americans should not have a white Jesus in the home, but in fact have a black Jesus in their home.
Okay. Even if it's a black Jesus,
and they still have done that.
Book,
and because of that, I think that black people need to have images that reflect them and images that they are proud of.
I think because it doesn't matter. We're not just talking about the image. We're talking about the doctrine.
Just because a person has
Can I give you another example of slave mentality?
Not making a lot of sense.
Let me give you another example of slave mentality. I wrote it in my book, Reflecting Black. I wrote an essay.
I'm confused. I have to stop you all because I'm confused.
Sure.
I wanted to know what a slave mentality was.
I'm going to give you an example.
I wanted an example of how we demonstrate a slave mentality.
Hold on. I'm going to speak here. Let's start here with the religion again. A slave mentality is one who would take Christianity or the Bible and worship a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, pale-skinned Jesus. One who would keep preaching this false doctrine of love your enemies. But a real black man, a free man. Hold on. Check this out. Check this out. Check this out.
Wait a minute.
And a slave.
Islam came to Africa through the
anybody who would follow
mentality.
First of all, anybody, now check this out, anybody who would follow a white Arab is a slave also. I believe in Islam is the original religion of the black man, as in all of the principles of Christianity and Islam are rooted in the original people.
Can I give you an example?
When we become slaves, when we follow that love thy enemy milquetoast doctrine that we've been following for 400 years.
A slave mentality is exhibited when the kind of crypto-fascism that disallows a variety of opinions to come forward. I think fascism and more or less the slave mentality are exhibited when black people began to evoke litmus tests for their newfound Afrocentric. Let me finish. Evoke litmus tests for authentic Negrohood or African Americanness or being black. Let me finish. So the point of all of us have such tremendous diversity in our blood, in our bones, in our culture. I resent, and I think that people to make slave mentality based upon what are external manifestations of what are more deep inward realities that people don't know about. Let me finish.
What happens
so that nobody, when somebody says to me, for example, let me take myself as an example. Here I am, you know, a professor who's taught in Ivy League, been trained in Ivy League, and also, but I came from Detroit. Poor, lived on welfare, didn't go to college until I was 21, suffered in the urban enclave. Let me finish.
Listen to what he's saying,
Shahrazad. Let me finish. So I'm saying that the variety of African American experiences in the urban terrain that I've absorbed into my own body, the black poor people with whom I grew up and that I know intimately, are part of who I am and what I do. Now, because I wrote an article, and I was about to say, that disagreed with Leonard Jeffries, people wrote me letters saying, you know, you're a sellout Negro, you're the kind of Negro that we want to... Let me finish. You're the kind of Negro that white folk love. Well, they don't know my name, they don't know my mama's name, they don't know where I came from.
Your name.
They don't know my name.
But you have to understand, and oppressed people, sir, have a revolutionary standard. And we have to purge ourselves of all those who are against the revolution.
Who determines the purge?
Or would be considered Uncle Tom. This is what is essential for our people. We have to purge ourselves of all Uncle Toms.
What is an Uncle Tom?
Uncle Tom is if you denounce Leonard Jeffries and the slave master approves of you. Now check this out. Check this out. Now listen to this. If the slave master would approve of you denouncing Leonard Jeffries, then you will be considered doing the bidding of the slave master.
Wait a minute. Leonard Jeffries should also be. She said he should be denounced as kind of.
Jeffries. I just said I disagree with
the kind of stuff that Leonard Jeffries does, the kinds of things that he says.
We can't even settle on the question. Let's now get to the answer.
And the host can't even talk.
If Leonard Jeffries is saying something that's counterproductive, no one has given you or anybody the authority or the right to say.
We got God authority.
If the slave master...
Is it not dangerous? Let me ask all of you a question. Leonard, let me ask this question, please. Please. Let me ask this question. First of all, I will ask that you all at least respect so that we can hear you. And one make a point, then the next one make a point, so I can follow this. Now, here we go. What I'm concerned about is that we blacks spend too much time arguing and debating each other instead of getting to the point. Who's blacker than? My name is this. I don't want to do that this morning because we don't have enough time for all of that. I don't want to do that on TV this morning. What I want to talk about is a slave mentality. What has it done to us? How does it manifest itself? And how has it destroyed us from unifying and becoming a strong group of people?
The main thing it has done is it has depersonalized us from each other, because the major problem that the slave had was how to individually survive. It was every man, every woman, every child for themselves, because there was no mercy coming from anybody beside them, externally, internally, anywhere.
Categorically true either,
depersonalization.
No, it's not.
That's not categorically true, though. We have to correct that, because there were slaves and there's evidence of it in history. There's evidence of slaves who really stuck together. Yes. You're the historian. Tell me.
1555 to 1655, that is not true. A lot of that started happening in the late 16, 17, 1800s.
But not only that, Larry Coger's book talks about the blacks who own slaves themselves. If we want to talk about the black slave, let me finish. If we want to talk about the slave experience, it's a very complex.
Into slavery.
And there's no question that your book, I think, points correctly to dealing with the consequences of slavery. I would say that's one slice of it. The psychological is one slice. What about the shift from manufacturing to service industry? What about the economy built on slavery? What about the... Let me finish.
What about the people handle? We have to deal with the problems we have, brother. We didn't have any control over that anyway.
What about the political economy of crack?
We keep trying to have impact upon things that we don't have any control over. But we do have control of
But Shahrazad, in all fairness, please listen to him.
Or control of our tongues and let us finish the point.
Because what we have to say is that everything impacts upon an individual being a slave.
But we have to start with self. We can't talk about a general condition until we know individually how are we fostering slavery. What are we doing? How are we thinking? How are we behaving that keeps slavery going even without a slave?
But it's a dialectical relationship. The self is not created by itself, unless you believe in the Thomas Jefferson chapter.
One vacuum we are in.
Certainly our actions today.
That is one place where we do have some influence and impact.
But see, I believe in individual responsibility, but individual responsibility must also be seen against the backdrop of collective responsibility. Now let me finish. Personal responsibility.
You mean like unity collective?
No, I'm talking about unity. I'm talking about collective responsibility, all of us together.
Then that's unity. Well, we're not going to have that.
No, I'm not talking about unity. Yeah. There's a difference between unity and solidarity and collective activity.
We're not going to have that.
But let me finish. The point is this, is that if you're individual, when you grow up in a home, for instance, when you grow up to want a pair of Air Jordans on your foot, that's a desire that is not planted in you as an individual. You have that socially created desire. Right? Let me finish. So that the social production of desire is a reality we have to deal with in our community. So when you talk about individual responsibility for slavery, the oldest tradition in the black community
is... I didn't say for slavery. I said our connection to it and how we're still
But I'm saying the connections to slavery and how we perpetuate them. If we believe that slavery was such a totally devastating Holocaust experience that we would contend, and I agree, we all agree that, and if it was that, then what we don't bear responsibility for reconstructing that alone. I don't say that we don't have individuals.
So y'all want the white people to help y'all. The people that put y'all in that condition.
And if we don't, we should be fighting by all means for reparations. And everyone here, hold on. Excuse me, sister, check this out. We should demand reparations as all of the others, the Jews and the Japanese who have suffered like us, so that we can repair under reparations the damage that has been done to us
and use
that to move on.
Let me present a proposition to you. If you are talking about groups that have been damaged by whites and enslavement, because blacks weren't the only people enslaved. Let me finish the question. You cannot hear the question, Shahrazad, objectively, unless you shut up and listen to it. Here is the issue. Here's the issue. If you're going to talk about reparations and what is fair, then what are you talking about? The white man returning to everyone that he enslaved, to everyone, the Native Americans.
Certainly,
if we're going to be fair,
the Native Americans certainly have a great case. We have the worst case of human suffering in the history of anybody on the planet, Jew, Japanese, notwithstanding. So we deserve what's rightfully ours. So then we can stop talking and dwelling in the past. We can take these trillions of dollars that the government owes us, put it in the institutions, and then move on. That's true if it would go to individuals. But if the reparations would go to institutions and business co-ops and collectives, then we could move on. This is a political agenda that we pursue, even if you perceive it as being naive. We must pursue the agenda of reparations. The statements I said.
And there have been many people who have done just that.
When I talk
about entrepreneurship talks about us building and collecting together. But what I want to do, folks, is I want to say this is how black people act. That is a deliberate, for example, we're going to take a break. When I come back, we are witnessing a tremendous amount of young black male violence. I want to talk about, is that a connection to slavery? Yes. And we'll find out right after this. If you've been watching, you know how difficult it is to discuss the issue of slavery. We're trying here this morning, and I want some help. I am looking at black-on-black crime. Young African-American men from the age of 12, the latest statistics out of the Justice Department, to 25 killing each other. It's a new phenomenon at this level. Is that a part of our slavery background that makes us want to kill each other like we are?
Absolutely. I say no. I say it doesn't have anything to do with our background in terms of the whole point of slavery. Let's face it, I think what's going on here is that you have people, because they can't get the kinds of things they need out of society. They can't get good jobs. They're in poverty. Some of them can't get out of poverty. They don't want to work at McDonald's or Burger King because it's not enough money. And so they feel the best way for them to make money is to go on the street and sell crack and sell drugs. Well, then that's a no-no in the black community.
And you say that's not a connection to slavery.
It's not a connection to slavery.
I would have to disagree and agree. It stems from us being brought into slaves of ships, being taught to hate each other and being put against each other by the slave master. Then, of course, the economic conditions that you say perpetuate the violence. Now, today, with the young black, and of course, the immorality, the indecency, the violence inbred in all of American society perpetuates this problem. Now, today, we have to come out of this, and we have to have the freedom to follow the leadership that will get us out of this condition. Now, thousands of black men are turning out to hear from the key leader of our day, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. The brothers are backing him, and hopefully they can become like what I feel I'm becoming, a revolutionary. That's the key for young black men, to become revolutionaries and to get your education to get out of this condition.
When a young black man rides by and shoots a 3-year-old baby in the head, that he's doing that as a direct result of slavery?
He's doing that out of complete ignorance and a deprivation of morality. And what he has to be taught is who the real enemy is. And if he knows who the real enemy is, he'll stop killing his own brothers and sisters overnight.
Well, but you have to remember that the vast majority of young black men, and I have to say this, are not killing, are not stealing, are not... We're talking about a percentage.
Well, it is a progression of problems that were created by slavery. First, the whip was used, the beating, and then ultimately later on, say we had another great impact, welfare perhaps was the next thing, and the next thing was the drugs. The white man gave the Indian alcohol. Right now, they're dealing with fetal alcohol syndrome in about 40 or 50% of their babies who are born. So different kinds of chemical weapons have been used against us. Drugs is another one, but it was in a progression of things that had been used to destroy us, and so it is related to slavery.
But nobody came to us. I mean, we should not blame everything on slavery. Let's face it. We can't do that. When we talk about the problems in the black community in terms of black men shooting a child or throwing, killing people in the black community, is that because of slavery?
It's an offshoot of it. Yes,
that's because that's hogwash. That is basically because people have lost the whole sense of morality. They have lost the sense. Let me finish. They've lost the sense.
How did they lose it, brother?
But they have lost the sense.
How did they lose it?
They have lost the sense of community. It is not because of slavery that we have drugs in our community. We made a decision. Some of us made a decision that we're going to allow drugs within our community.
Let me
finish here, because when I was a child growing up, you know, all the people, my parents, my grandparents, they did not allow things to happen within the black community. It's not.
Let me say this. Now, see, the difficulty of speaking about this subject is that there's so many factors involved. If we say is there one-to-one correspondence between slavery and crack, we would say ostensibly no, because we say because there are different forms. The technology has advanced, the Uzis and 9MMs and so on. But there is a relationship of antipathy toward black skin and black people, and the forces of acrimony against black people directed against them, whether it's the introduction of drugs within the inner city, whether it's the self-defeating attitudes that we adopt in reflection of the nihilism, the annihilation of our own black community. But let me finish. But there's also a way in which we got to link it beyond the psychological to the economic and the political.
Sure.
When you're living in a culture that has been deprived, it's not simply a matter of morality, as if to suggest that people who are poor don't have morality. No. Right. Many people have morality. They don't have the means to make their lives any better than what they are. Let me finish. I'm not suggesting it's merely money, but money helps. What I'm talking about is an economic devastation of post-industrial inner-city communities where black people don't have the wherewithal day-to-day to make it. We have a working poor category. Most people get up in the morning, they work 9 to 5, and they still fall below the poverty level. They have the Puritan ethic. I mean, this is what the Nation of Islam has taught us as the black Puritan moral ethic. That is self-discipline, tremendous regard for the body. Although the problem with some of the ethics of self-discipline is that they become fascist. Let me tell you how they become fascist. Because they refuse to acknowledge that somebody who disagrees with me can still be a brother or sister, can still be black. Well, let me finish. Leonard Green is a black gay Republican. Some might see that as an oxymoronic statement, but there he is. Let me finish. This brother here is from the Nation of Islam. You're an independent black author.
That's what we're dealing with.
No, let me finish. Okay. And I'm a black author. I'm saying that the variety of blackness and the beauty of blackness is the fact that we all have this in common.
Yes, but we have to.
We don't have to accept
wait a minute. What we do have to accept this morning, Shahrazad, what we do have to, and then I'll let you speak.
Yes, ma'am.
What we do have to do this morning on our show, Our Voices, is we have to respect whatever you are as a black man and black woman.
No question.
And that I will not stand for anything else. This morning we will respect each other and we will respect the differences in our conversation.
Yes.
It's your turn.
Okay, well, I let one thing pass, sir. It's the United States government that's bringing drugs into this country. Now, the reasons that we use them are, of course, because of the things that we have been taught in slavery and the economic conditions of today. That's why, as the president of Unity Nation, I back the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who will be bringing 1 million men, to telling them to clean up their lives, to stand up, to respect their women, to clean themselves up so that we can become a strong community, irrespective of whether we get reparations or not.
And I think we should respect that ability to do that. And I think that we should honor that, and as blacks, I don't think that we should be divisive. If black men need to get together, I don't know why black women should be upset. We should all get together and talk about it.
But see, one of the problems, I think one of the virtues of Shahrazad's book is that it tells us not to blame a Jew, to blame a Korean, to blame a Chaldean, to blame somebody else, behind every problem we have, to blame some other ethnic group without taking responsibility on the levels we are able to assume responsibility for what we are.
Let me make that a question.
That's the point, brother.
Let me make that a question then, because I'm in total agreement, and it's so nice to have you all in agreement. I'm in total agreement with that theory. Not all of it, but just that theory. So what I am interested in asking is this. If we are in agreement that we as black Americans need to examine ourselves. We need to find out why the man isn't supporting his children, why the woman isn't taking care of that baby, why the child is going out. Then when do we get to the point where we do that? Because when you ask a black person, and I've done it as a talk show host, to examine ourselves, as Jesse says, you point a finger at someone and all of the rest are pointing back, then you're called picking on blacks. You're not understanding blacks. You're blaming the victim. I want black people to understand that when you don't feed your child, it's not Reagan or Bush or any other white man. It's you not feeding your child. So how do we get to that?
Well, you know what? But see, black people have never had an either-or attitude. That's the whole problem. See, the problem is in the analysis. The analysis would make us presume, in all respect to Leonard, is that the conservatives have a lock on the notion of self-responsibility. Self-help is the oldest tradition of self-help of helping the black community, because often we only had self to hold on to. So my point is this. So it's both taking care of those larger socio-economic structures that we have to combat, as well as personal moral responsibilities. Both and, not either or. And we've been doing it all the time.
And it takes organization to achieve those ends. Marcus Garvey started self-help. Honorable Elijah Muhammad.
He extended self-help. He didn't start. He extended it.
Okay, well, these were the major forerunners of self-help in this country. But it takes organization now.
But
and fortunately, I'm part of an organizational structure that is right now reaching out to thousands of black men. And that's why I'm going to be supporting Marion Barry to also return to office.
But here's what Michael was talking about. Wait a minute, let me ask this question.
What Islam is that say we supposed, I hated to mention this, brother, that's in the book too about politics. What Islam are you following? Certainly not no teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to tell you to register and vote in the white man's political system.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, in Message to the Black Man, he said if there's a black politician who is worthy and qualified, then we should support and back that politician.
He said, but there's not one. I read that.
Page 107.
That was then, and this is now. Hello, folks, I'll take a break.
The reality
that was then, and this is now. And the reality of the world that we live in, the reality, Shahrazad, of the world that we live in, is that we must become involved in the political arena. And we must be verbal, and we must be involved. When we come back, after this break, when we come back, I want to talk about how we can get over our slave mentality and how we can begin to take a look to examine whether we are acting in a slave fashion or not. Right after this. Welcome back. This is a tough group to try to control this morning, but I'm doing the best I can, so let me try. The question is, if we are acting in a slave fashion, what can we do to change it?
Well, I think several things. First of all, what we must do is allow, if I can underscore one thing, the black-on-black homicide does not happen most pitifully or deleteriously in the ghettos. It happens in middle-class, bourgeois people who refuse to acknowledge the diversity. Howard Thurman said the following: you can go to the Atlantic Ocean, you can dip your glass into the Atlantic Ocean. It may be full of Atlantic Ocean, but it ain't all the Atlantic Ocean. The same is with truth. All of us may have some insight, but we don't know it all. The first thing we do to love black folk is to love the diversity of black folks. Secondly, what we do is to make sure we have a balance between systemic analysis, that is, talking about the socio-economic political structures that have continually conspired against people blindly, that is, black people, as well as taking responsibility for our own children, as you say. I have heard of women who are organize themselves in welfare tenant organizations. There are black people who are continually on the front line trying to make sure that the misery, the homelessness, the destructive consequences are somehow resisted. So I'm saying we need both and. And then finally, what we need to do is to have what I call a sophisticated urban spirituality. That means regardless of whether you're Islam, whether you're Christian or whatever, that you have a sense of connectedness and rootedness. Somebody said that we live in a cut flower civilization. That is, we have pretty flowers, but they don't have any roots. A dandelion may be nasty, but it's connected to a root. Connectedness to a tradition that allows us to develop constantly new enterprises, new insights upon that tradition.
I would like to answer that question. Go ahead, brother. I'll yield to you first.
That.
Yes, sir.
In the word universe, there are two words, unity and diversity. We are a diverse people, but the unity comes no matter what religion we are. For millions and trillions of years, we have always believed in one God, and we need to understand that today, put all of our differences aside. Secondly, what I'm doing to get out of a slave mentality as a student, I'm not going out here begging the white man for a job. I am going out making a job as an attorney and a lawyer for myself and many other brothers who I am with. I'm setting up international business trade between my brothers in Africa and myself. I'm beginning to do that, and hopefully I can become a symbol for thousands of other young brothers out there who let them know that getting an education doesn't make you a punk.
You just gave me a new definition for universe to this morning.
Well, let me answer that question. Now, you say, what can we do? The first thing we can do, and this may not be the test anybody want to accept, are you still a slave? But before we can find out if we are still acting as slaves, we have to first be able to itemize those behaviors so we can remove them. So if we don't examine our behavior and find out which one of them are connected to a slave behavior or to our slave history, we won't ever find out. It has nothing to do with what we might just decide to do up and do. We have to examine ourselves, examine our history, and find out, how are we still functioning as slaves? What are we doing now that we did in slavery?
I would like to know how to do that, because I've been trying to do that for this hour this morning.
Well,
to find out how it is manifested. There are definite slave behaviors. But the slave, if I can just say this, because I haven't said that much
slave behaviors.
There are definite slave behaviors. But the slave was able to act in a duality. There was the slave behavior was when the boss came, the slave shut up, bent his head. That is a behavior. That's a behavior.
That's schizophrenia.
But when the slave left the master and came back into his own group, he had another behavior, which was the same thing with the Negro. When the Negro went to work in the white woman's house, she acted one way. But when she came home, she acted another. So how are we dealing with the slave?
I tend to think here that you know, I'm hearing all of this stuff, and I think your book is not very objective at all. It's subjected, very much so, and it's very dangerous, because you set a process up in the book where it's based on your premise, and when someone else... Let me finish. But it doesn't say that. When people read that book and see those questions in there, some of the questions are, you ask in one point, and then it's like, and this is part of the same question. Right. I mean, it's not objective enough for people to participate in that process. Are we still dealing with slavery? Are we still dealing with slavery? It isn't. Are we still dealing with the whole issue of slavery? Yes, we are still dealing with the issue of slavery. Right. How we should not deal with the issue of slavery? As she said, we have to recognize what those behaviors are and change those behaviors.
And recognizing those behaviors.
Change those behaviors.
Listen to this.
How we change those, let me finish. How we change those behaviors is to objectively find out what they are,
right.
not based on
Not
based on somebody else's interpretation,
yes,
but to find out what they are, and in terms of finding then they can do something about it.
Listen, the objective criterion, brother, for what makes a slave is defined by the slave maker, the slave master, and if what each one of us is doing, if it is approved or disapproved by the slave master, then we can tell if we're becoming a slave. Case in point, if the slave master approves of me beating my woman, then I know that I'm acting as a slave. Hold on, check this out. If the slave master approves of me rapping on the mic that our women are bitches and whores, then I'm acting as a slave. If the slave master approves of me persecuting my own and repudiating and denouncing my own people, then I'm acting as a slave. If the slave master approves of me being a Republican, if the slave master says he likes me being a Republican, then I'm a slave.
Minister Louis Farrakhan is on the cover of Time magazine. If that's not being embraced and identified and saluted by the white media, I don't know what that is.
But he could have said that he didn't want to be on there.
No. You don't have a choice. I don't have a choice of whether I don't have a choice of whether I've been attacked in all of these news magazines. But they said, what did they call it? The Ministry of Rage. They try to set you up to destroy you. And so we should oppose whatever the enemy supports and support whatever the enemy opposes.
That's too simple.
That is the objective criteria.
Because the enemy may be, you know what, they have also praised Minister Louis Farrakhan for going into the ghetto and rehabilitating black men. Now they're praising that. Are you going to stop that? No, that's one of the key pillars of your own attempt to reconstruct black culture. The litmus test for white folk, for white folk liking or not liking what we do is we got to get beyond that, because white folk gonna like some of what we do and ain't gonna like what other things we do. What we got to determine, is it good for us? Can we do this? Right? We need to neither impress them nor oppress them. What we need to do.
Because the minority of that which white people approve of what the Honorable Louis Farrakhan does is because it benefits white people. Him standing and cleaning black people up and getting them off welfare, that benefits white people.
It might have a dual.
Other than that, they hate him with a passion.
Malik, I'm taking your point where you talked about if the whites approve of the master, because I like to call it what it is. You say master, you mean white, okay? Nelson Mandela has just become the first president of South Africa black. He has not only embraced his own, but he has embraced others who have been a part of it. So what would you call him?
Let me see. Nelson Mandela is a great brother, but we have to understand the process that he's engaging in supplements white rule in South Africa and Western capitalist domination in South Africa far, far into the future. Though he's a good brother, he is being manipulated and being used by outside.
What would you have him? So then you would call him a slave. Would you call Mandela a slave?
I wouldn't call Mandela a slave. I wouldn't go that far as to call him a slave. I would say that the brother is being used by the slave master.
But could he be using? Because there were slaves who were very wise. Listen to my point. Listen to my point. There were slaves who were very wise, who on appearance it would appear they were going along with what the slave master said. But in reality what they were doing is using that very system.
I understand, but they said the same thing. Now check this out, check this out. In the civil rights movement, they said the same thing in the civil rights movement. And if we march in and wade in and take these mediocre actions, that we'll get to where we want to get. And the Kerner Commission pointed out that 20 or 30 years after 1968 that we're still separate and unequal.
Let me finish. What you're talking about, Bev, is what a man named James Scott calls everyday forms of resistance. That is, in slave societies and other forms of oppression where people cannot articulate their views externally, they have to survive other ways. They shuck and jive before the master. They sing songs like "We Ain't Got Long to Stay Here." What they're doing is signaling Harriet Tubman is coming along the Underground Railroad. Let's go.
I have to take a break. Hold that point. When we come back, the professor speaks right after this.
Oh, now you're going to start kissing her.
Shahrazad Ali's book, Are You Still a Slave?, hits hard because it's a direct confrontation with the uncomfortable truths we, as Black people, have had to endure. It's a mirror reflecting our own suffering, struggles, and the lingering effects of historical trauma. The title alone is bold, and the content that follows is just as unapologetic. Ali doesn't sugarcoat things, and that's exactly what makes the book so powerful. From the moment we hear about slavery in history books, we're told it ended. But the reality is, slavery didn't end. It evolved. The chains were removed physically, but the mental, emotional, and spiritual shackles remained. Ali's book doesn't just discuss the physical horrors of slavery. It dives deep into the psychological impact that has been passed down through generations. We were taught to believe that freedom came with the abolition of slavery, but Ali shows us that the kind of freedom we've been promised is elusive, as we've been conditioned in ways that are still trapping us today. In Are You Still a Slave?, Ali talks about how Black people, even after the formal end of slavery, are still enslaved by the ideologies, behaviors, and systems that were put in place to control us. It's not just about laws or politics. It's about the way we live, think, and even how we treat one another. Ali doesn't mince words when it comes to addressing the fact that many of us are complicit in our own oppression. We've been so deeply conditioned by the systems that were designed to break us that we often perpetuate the same cycles of self-hate and disempowerment. One of the central themes in Ali's writing is the need for self-awareness and the rejection of victimhood. She urges us to stop seeing ourselves as mere victims of the system, because when we adopt that mindset, we give away our power. The notion of slavery in her book is not just about the past, but is about how we are still mentally enslaved to certain ideas, habits, and behaviors that keep us from moving forward. It's a call to understand that our minds have been colonized, and until we reclaim them, we will continue to be shackled, even if the physical chains are gone. Ali also doesn't hesitate to call out the Black community for its role in perpetuating this cycle. She discusses the importance of taking personal responsibility. For too long, we've accepted roles in society that diminish our value, both individually and collectively. In our schools, our homes, our churches, and our relationships, we've been taught to hate ourselves, to downplay our own worth, to accept less than we deserve. This, she argues, is a form of enslavement that we have to break free from. We have to stop making excuses for our own behavior and face the reality of our situation. But that's hard to do when society doesn't want us to see the truth. Ali challenges us to face that reality head on. She touches on the importance of Black men and women understanding and supporting each other In the struggle for true freedom, there is a focus on the dynamic between Black men and women, and how these relationships have been distorted over time. Under the weight of centuries of oppression, our roles have been confused, and Ali doesn't shy away from addressing how these gender dynamics can lead to further division in the community. The Black family has been broken by forces beyond our control, but we must repair it ourselves, and that requires us to unlearn the damage that has been done and start rebuilding with a sense of purpose and unity. Throughout the book, Ali stresses that freedom is a continuous process, not a destination. It's not something that happens once and for all. It's something that requires constant effort, self-reflection, and action. Ali pushes for self-reliance, for Black people to understand that the systems that have been put in place to oppress us aren't going to change overnight. It's not enough to protest or to demand change. We must change internally, in our hearts and minds. We must look at the systems in our communities and dismantle them from the inside out, using our knowledge and strength as a collective force. The truth is, we have been oppressed for so long that many of us have internalized the idea that this is just the way things are. But Ali's book is an attempt to pull us out of that fog, to remind us that we were not born to be subjugated, and that we don't have to live this way. It's a call to self-awareness, self-empowerment, and most importantly, to action. It's not enough to say we're free. We have to prove it every day by how we live, how we treat each other, and how we build our communities. Ali's message is clear. Freedom requires us to confront the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. We have to acknowledge the pain, the oppression, and the ways in which we've been conditioned to accept less than what we deserve. But we also have to know that this is not the end. This is only the beginning of the work we must do to truly free ourselves from the invisible chains that bind us. The fact that this book has stirred controversy doesn't surprise me. It's hard for people to hear the truth, especially when it challenges the very foundations of their comfort. But the truth doesn't care about comfort. The truth cares about liberation. Shahrazad Ali's Are You Still a Slave? Is a wake-up call, one that forces us to confront the ways in which we have been lied to, manipulated, and most tragically, have come to accept our own oppression. It's time to wake up, stand up, and demand the freedom that is rightfully ours, not just on paper, but in every aspect of our lives. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please like, share, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, and be sure to tell a friend to tell a friend. Sending love to each one of you. Feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts on the topic.